Okay, we're going to do chapter 1 today, but before we do that, you should have already listened to the prologue. And the prologue gives you a glimpse into the best known myth about Medusa. And so it is a idea. Most information that you look at it, it can vary. It has different origins. Some people believe that Medusa was a based on a historical figure in several different stories. She gets her origin also from the Middle East, and some individuals believe that she is connected to the gods of that era. And so there's what I'm doing with this story is I'm going to create something for Medusa that's more than 5 lines. And I am going to use probably the best known myth to start the story, but you'll see how all the different pieces of information interweave and give you a full-blown story about a woman that deserves a full-blown story. So chapter 1, Girl to Woman. Meddy walked down the same market street she had most of her life, but today felt different. Something in the manner of those he had around her had changed. She was unsure what was different, but it made her feel simultaneously exposed and isolated. She softly spoke to the seller and exchanged a portion of her daily collected eggs for some bread and moved on to other items her father had sent her to fetch. As she picked through the vegetables, she felt a presence behind her. She turned and found Alcibiades hovering over her. Good day, Meddy, he said with a toothy grin. Shopping? Yes, Meddy replied, since it was obvious that she was doing exactly that. You should have some figs. I cannot afford them today. She turned back to the seller, offering eggs. She asked, Can I have some asparagus? The seller nodded and started to bundle the asparagus when Alcibiades interrupted. Let me pay. He handed the seller the drachma and add some figs too. The seller quickly took the coin before Meddy could refuse his generosity. She smiled politely, took the items, slipping them into her basket. Nodding, she tried to walk away, but Alcibiades followed. How old are you, Meddy? My 12th summer has just passed. You have grown up quickly over the past year. She nodded, but unsure how to respond, she milled through the open barrel of olives. Is your father home? Yes. Let him know I will see him later today. Okay. Alcibiades reached into her basket and grabbed a fig. He bit into the soft, juicy fruit and gave her a twinkling smile. She simply stared in confusion. After he had left, she collected the rest of her items and headed home. That night, Alcibiades visited Meddy's father and discussed her future long into the night. She is still a child, her father argued. But my offer is sound, Alcibiades retorted. So you think I will take the first offer? Her father asked. Do you think she will have more? Look at her. She is blooming. Give her time to grow. If she is plucked too soon, she could wilt and die before she can bear full fruit. Then a payment for future betrothal. How long must I wait? At least 4 more summers. 3. Fair enough. And you must match any other offers. Alcibiades grinned. We have a deal. Meddy laid in her bed, listening to the men share a drink and seal their contract. She stared at the stars through the cracks in the thatched roof and felt a desire to be among them. The next day at the market, when she offered her eggs for barter, she was refused and told that anything she picked up was already paid for. Shock was her first response, confusion her next, and then she saw the seller nod to someone behind her. She looked over her shoulder and saw Alcibiades raise a glass to her and drink. Meddy suddenly felt like one of the goods at the market. She had been bartered and traded and had no say in the matter. Meddy felt disconnected and lost over the next few weeks. She went through her daily motions, conflicted over her fate. Alcibiades' offer was putting food on their table. It was also making it possible to barter and trade for other much needed items that improved her life, the life of her family, but at the cost of her own future. Alcibiades would also visit, and though he was kind in thought and words, Medi felt no affection for him. Her father assured her affection would come with time, but Medi only felt growing dread. Medi, Alcibiades called to her as she drew water from a well. "Hello, Alcibiades," she replied in a resigned tone. "Medi," he said again, "are you well?" "I am fine," she replied, not looking up, taking her drawn water back to the house. "You seem sad. Is there something I can do?" "No," she replied. "Let me walk you to the market. The figs are ripe and sweet. Perhaps some dates?" "I am not hungry." "How about a new shawl?" "The one I own is fine." "But this one," he replied, and picked up a shawl she wore off her shoulders, "is old and worn. You need one bright and new." Medi's eyes flared as she snatched back the shawl. He chuckled softly. "Is it sentimental?" "No," she snapped, "but it is not yours to take." "Oh, don't be angry with me. I merely want to buy you something pretty." "Thank you, but no." She continued up the path, an unusual anger stroking in her chest. He followed. "Do you not like my gifts?" "I did not ask for any." "But a pretty girl like you deserves pretty things. I'm merely trying to be nice." Medi hung her head, partially in shame, partially in defeat. He was only trying to be nice. She lifted her head and presented a polite smile. "Thank you for your kindness, Alcibiades. I do not deserve it." His grin widened and his chest swelled with pride, causing his round belly to protrude out further. "See, you are even prettier when you smile. Let me buy you that shawl." "Of course, Alcibiades." "Please, call me Alcy." He leant down and kissed her softly on the cheek. Medi relented to the kiss, but kept her eyes downwards so he could not see her discontent. At the market, she began to realize what the feeling was that she always felt, that confusion as to why everyone stared when she passed by. It was her appearance and the way others looked at her. Men would stare, forgetting what they were doing, and leer at her. Women would turn away from her and focus on their task rather than making eye contact. That sensation of her every move being watched, but feeling utterly alone, washed over her again. It was becoming too common a feeling, and she wished it would go away. She went through the motions of politeness as Alcibiades showered her with gifts, insisting she try some sweets, adorning her in fine cloth and jewelry. She glanced into a polished mirror and felt like a sacrificial goat that was being anointed and covered in flowers before climbing the hill to be slaughtered. "Smile, Medi," Alcibiades said, placing another kiss on her cheek. All eyes were still on her, watching him take claim. Medi's heart started to pound and her stomach churned. In her politest tone, she said, "I need to go home." Before he could object, she turned from him and walked away, holding back rising tears. Compressed emotions started bubbling to the surface. She increased her pace, her heart pounding, chest heaving. Her feet carried her out into the marketplace and down the shore. Without hesitating, she rushed into the sea until the waves crested at her waist. She looked down and saw the waves tugging at her new shawl. Its brightness and newness disgusted her. Medi tore the shawl off and tossed it into the water, letting the tide slowly draw it out to sea and away from her. She sat down in the waves and felt the calmness sweep over her. Medi felt at home in the sea. Even now, the desire to lay down and let the waves drag her away beckoned. She brushed back her curly hair and felt the jewelry Alcibiades had bought. She removed them and watched them dance in the water in water and light as they sunk into the sand below, which gladly devoured them, showing only a glimmer of their new treasure. Feeling freer and more herself, she stood and waded back out of the water and onto a rock to let the sun dry her clothes. Well done. Medi turned toward the voice and saw a woman standing behind a makeshift frame that pulled a fishing net taut. It was Danae, the fisherman's wife, but not just an ordinary fisherman's wife. It was said he found her drifting at sea, rescued from certain death, and married her. She wiped the snot from her nose and brushed away the tears. Pardon? In her haste to get to the water, Medi had taken the first path she saw, which apparently led to a personal lot. I said, well done, replied Danae, as she pointed towards the water. It might come back, but you were right to toss it in. She reached down into a basket and drew out a large needle and fresh twine. Really? Medi asked, already regretting the bold action. She got up from the rock and tried to make herself more presentable. It was one thing to straighten a chitin, another to rein in her unruly hair that loved to dance in the ocean breeze. The woman nodded, focusing on her work. Men think they can decide our fate, but we do have some control. How? My father has agreed. The contract is made, Medi asked, coming closer, watching her nimble fingers move the needle in and out of the aged net, and then pull the fresh thread tight, sealing up the hole. Your father may think he has the right to decide your fate, but you choose whether to agree. I can't refuse. He's my father. To do so will dishonor him. Danae nodded. But how does he honor you? Giving you, his own child, no say in your future. Perhaps this is my fate. She put down her needle and put out her hands. Medi took them hesitantly, but felt a sense of calmness as their clasp tightened. My father was obsessed with fate. He also believed he had ultimate power over me, his child. When the sages of Delphi told him a future he did not like, he locked me away. He locked you away? Yes, I was forbidden from seeing any man for fear my child would kill him. Medi gasped. It was awful. It was so lonely, but despite my father's attempts, I still became pregnant and bore a child. How? The woman waved away the question. The how isn't the issue presently, but the truth, despite what they believe. They do not own our fate. She lifted a lid off a dish and offered it to Medi. Medi took a slice of pastelli. It was crunchy and chewy, and the action was soothing. So you believe I have control over my fate? She poured them both watered-down wine and took a sip from her cup. Each of us has a part to play, but we choose what it will be. Prisoner, servant, wife. Are those my only choices? Medi asked, taking a sip to wash down the sticky confection. Danae laughed. Typically, but perhaps you can find another path. I don't know. How can I defy my father? And even if I do, what else is there for me but to be a wife? If not to Alcibiades, then another. The woman set down her cup and leaned forward, gently brushing back Medi's drying tresses. Your end may be certain, but how you get there is your decision. The statement sent a fateful chill down her spine. But before she could speak, she saw Danae look past her shoulder towards the water. Mother, came a young man's voice. as he and an elderly man pulled a small boat onto the shore. Yes, Perseus? I hoped. I hoped you finished fixing that net because this one is bad luck. Hush, grumbled the elderly man. The fish weren't biting. They don't have to bite if you have a net, Perseus retorted with a giant grin. Danae gave her son a half-hearted glare, then rose from her chair and slipped into the older man's arms. Do not listen to him, Polydictes, or Dictes. Do not listen to him, Dictes. I am sure his incessant talking was the real reason. Dictes nodded. I agree. I couldn't even get a decent nap. He lifted his head. He lifted his head to look past Danae and onto a nervous Medi sitting in front of his house. Hello, he said. Medi had never heard a kinder voice than that of Dictes. There was something about his tenor that was immediately disarming. Hello, she answered back, despite his welcoming nature. She felt a need to stand and exit. I'll be going. Danae reached out to her. No, stay, have dinner. No, my own is surely expecting me. They likely think I have run away. Danae grinned and approached her once more. She drew Medi's hands into hers and repeated, You choose. Medi smiled and squeezed back. She looked away from Danae and caught the rays of the setting sun peek from behind Athena's temple at the top of the hill. It made her think of Danae's mention of Delphi. Perhaps the goddess of wisdom can help? Perhaps. She started winding up the path to the temple. Her whole life, Athena's temple stood watch over this land. It was massive in size, with huge pillars encasing the inner temple, and inside was a giant gold statue of Athena. She looked so strong and beautiful. Medi felt a deep connection to Athena, almost as deep as her connection to the sea, which she always found strange. Poseidon, as the god of the sea, was chaotic in nature, while Athena was more direct and true. Medi knelt at the great statue of Athena, and there she prayed for wisdom. Goddess of wisdom, she spoke in a voice soft and lost. Why do I not want to marry? The tears found their way to the surface again. She brushed them away. Alcibiades seems kind and wishes nothing but to shower me with affection and gifts, but I feel nothing. Should I be grateful that I am pretty enough for a man like him? Marrying him means my family will want for nothing, but as her unspoken words hung in the air, a line of priestesses entered the room. She watched them file in, moving slowly and rhythmic. As they knelt around her and prayed to Athena, she could feel their warmth. She could feel their peace, and she felt as though she was part of them. After they finished praying, they each stood and touched Athena's spear, then exited. Medi felt the same compulsion. She stood, falling in behind them, and when she touched the spear, a sense of peace and clarity pushed through her body. She followed the procession deeper into the temple grounds. They didn't seem to notice or care as she entered the inner sanctum. Inside, she found an open courtyard where women sparred. They grappled and wrestled, throwing each other to the ground, then getting up and doing it again. Others fought with swords, either practicing drills or fighting each other. The sound of swords striking thrilled her ears. Beyond them were others shooting arrows at targets. Some wore their chittins that were dropped to their waist, exposing bare breast, while others wore close-fitting armor compressing their chest. Her heart began to beat in time with the thunk, thunk, thunk. of arrows striking in unison. She found herself wandering into a covered atrium where several women were deep in discussion over a map, while others were lost deep in thought, reading the scrolls. She stared in awe. A woman called to her, "Can I help you?" Medi's heart fluttered. "Can I speak to the head priestess?" "Why?" one of them asked, taking in her still wet hair in excited state. "I wish to be one of you." Okay, that's chapter 1. If you want more, please like, share, and let me know what you think. You have questions, you want to know some of this research I did, I am more than happy to answer those questions as well. All right.